What New Orleans Saints quarterback Derek Carr needs to have a successful 2024 season isn't very far away from what we've already seen him do. We got all that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at what it will take for Derek Carr, New Orleans Saints quarterback, to have a successful 2024 NFL season. We'll take a look at why so many experts are predicting him to have a down year for the Saints. We'll take a look at FanDuel's 2024 props and how they say that it's not going to be the greatest season for Derek Carr, but it sure won't be the worst. But I'm here to explain where we're going to start off today's show, which is that it doesn't take very much for Derek Carr to have a successful 2024 based on what we've already seen him do throughout his career. We got that coming up for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen of the day every day, for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more, especially right now because FanDuel is giving out brand new boost bonuses to all customers. That's right. Every customer getting something every day all summer long. You're going to be able to find that over at FanDuel.com. That's where you want to head to get started. So, look, Derek Carr doesn't have to do anything specifically remarkable in 2024 or that he hasn't done before in his career to have a successful 2024. I would say that a successful 2024 season will include him basically outperforming what he did last year. His last year's stat line, just basic stat line. I'm not really looking at win-loss percentage or win-loss record because I don't consider those quarterback stats. Those are team stats in my opinion. But in terms of the quarterback stats on some basic passing statistics, 3,878 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and over a 68% completion percentage. Those are his numbers from 2023. Not terrible, not top 10, but just outside of the top 10 in most of those categories, except for completion percentage where he was within the top 10. So when I look at 2024 and what it is that he needs to do in order to have what would be called a successful season, I think you just want to improve on those numbers. Now, having nearly 3,900 passing yards, considering that he also missed 3 halves of games throughout the season, I would say that asking for a 4,000 passing yard season is not that out of the ordinary. In fact, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, Derek Carr had 4 straight passing seasons over 4,000 passing yards. That didn't stop until Josh McDaniels in 2022 and then Pete Carmichael in 2023. So there's not really, and missing more time in both of those seasons than he had missed throughout his entire career. 2 games at the end of 2022 and then 1.5 games effectively in 2023. So it's not ridiculous to assume that a 4,000 yard passing season could be the measure of success when it comes to passing yardage for Derek Carr, nor is it ridiculous to assume that he could get there. 25 or more passing touchdowns. That seems to make sense for Derek Carr, who had 25 passing touchdowns last year, especially if he's able to stay on the field for all 17 games this year, exceeding 25 passing touchdowns, maybe even entering the 30 passing touchdown conversation would go a long way for a successful season for Derek Carr, although I don't think he has to have a 30 touchdown passing season. He could have a 29, 28, Tua Tagovailoa type numbers, things like that in 2024 and be just fine. Finally, 12 or fewer interceptions. Now I'm giving him a few more interceptions. He had 8 in 2023. I'm not predicting 4 more. I'm saying that if he threw up to 4 more, I wouldn't stress out about it. 12 interceptions in the NFL these days when you're taking more risks downfield, all those other things, just not a big deal to me. And I think, too, you get a little bit of leeway in this system because you have a spectacular defense to rely on where you can go out there and take some of those risks. The defense isn't going to be mad at you for throwing an interception. They're whole persona is going to be, let's go get the ball back for the offense. So I don't think that having a few more of those interceptions, if it leads to more risk taking, which leads to more scoring on the other hand, I don't think that that's bad. Derek Carr had, I believe it was the second fewest turnover-worthy passes in 2024 in terms of turnover-worthy percentage. Let me say it that way. According to Pro Football Focus, he's got some room to be able to take some more risks if he wants to take some more risks and maybe be in the top 10 of turnover-worthy, or excuse me, top 10 of lowest turnover-worthy percentage in 2024, as opposed to top 2 like he was in 2023. I think being careful with the football a little bit too much sometimes can keep some scoring off the board. I think you got to be able to take some of those risks. And now, with the New Orleans Saints offense making a concerted effort to attack the middle of the field, you're going to inherently take more of those risks as well. You're throwing into more traffic. You're throwing into more high congestion areas. You're throwing into areas where somebody can be lurking or crash from over the top and all these other things. It's fine. You can take those risks because it's going, as long as it's also, on the other hand, increasing your production on the other side. The other thing that I would be looking at is a 65+% completion percentage. Derek Carr tied his third best career completion percentage last year with 68.4. I think sticking over 65% makes sense. He tends to be pretty careful with the ball. Again, we were just looking at those very low turnover-worthy pass percentage numbers. That all kind of goes hand in hand here. I think that gives you an opportunity here to say, okay, yeah, 65+% is pretty good when it comes to completion percentage, considering that most quarterbacks kind of hover in the lower 60s anyway, and then very well executing quarterbacks in terms of taking care of the football are up there in terms of 65 and above. So if he's 65 and above, but he's not 68, totally fine. Just to give a little bit of a comparison beyond just looking at the Derek Carr of it all, let's look at the Klint Kubiak part of this as well. Kirk Cousins in 2021 had a spectacular season with Klint Kubiak calling plays. 4,221 passing yards, 33 passing touchdowns, just 7 interceptions, and then completed over 66% of his passes. Now, he did have Justin Jefferson to throw the football to during that time, so that's worth mentioning. And I think Kirk Cousins did a lot of orchestration at the line of scrimmage as well, but I don't imagine that won't be the case, or at least that Derek Carr wouldn't have the freedom and opportunity to do that himself as well, especially with incorporating motion, being able to incorporate some of those pre-snap diagnosis and things like that, or diagnostics, if you will, and things like that. I think that seeing Derek Carr have a little bit more command of the offense at the line of scrimmage would actually be a more welcome sight than it would be a concern at all. So I think just looking at Kirk Cousins going over 4,200 yards, over 30 touchdowns, under 12 interceptions, over 65% completion percentage in 2021, and Klint Kubiak's first ever exposure as a play caller pre-Shanahan days with not as good a defense as what New Orleans has, hopefully with a better run game here in New Orleans. I think that makes all those numbers attainable for Derek Carr here in 2024 and Klint Kubiak in 2024 as well. So that's kind of where I'm leaning when it comes to Derek Carr. You want to see a successful season from the quarterback? 4,000 plus passing yards, 25 plus passing touchdowns, 12 or fewer interceptions, and complete 65+% of your passes. Be careful, but take risks, maximize where your playmakers, all these other things. I think that's all that it's going to take. And the rest of it falls in line with the scheme, the system, the play calling, and the weapons. Coming up next, I want to take a look at the FanDuel odds. FanDuel has passing yards over under as well as passing touchdowns over under. I want to just use that as a benchmark to have a conversation about how maybe what's being expected isn't Derek Carr's best, but it's certainly far from his worst as well. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and a place to go to make every moment more. Yes, I know the NHL playoffs are over. The NBA playoffs are over, but there's still so much to check out with MLB games continuing to roll along, the WNBA on fire. There's even already some NFL stuff you can get in on as well. The New Orleans Saints favored to open the season up against the Carolina Panthers at home. Derek Carr, you can get some of his passing over-unders for both passing yards and passing touchdowns, and a ton more that you can find, including great WNBA action. Will Angel Reese continue her double-double streak into 14, 15, 16, 17 games? Yeah, you can bet on all of that as well. There's a ton for you over at FanDuel. And it doesn't stop there, because right now FanDuel is giving all customers the hookup. New boost and bonuses daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long at FanDuel. Just head over to FanDuel.com to start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, family. Our partners over at FanDuel might not be projecting Derek Carr to have his best career season, but they're certainly not projecting him to have his worst, like some folks might be. So I want to take a look at these betting metrics just to kind of use them as a kind of foundation upon what maybe others are expecting from Derek Carr after we laid out what a successful season would look like to us. We appreciate you very much. As always, make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports Today's 24/7 stream, a 24/7 stream built for you to make sure you get all the biggest stories from around the world of sports every single day from the local experts that know those teams and cover those stories the absolute best. You can find it for free every day over on Locked On Sports Today's YouTube page and on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app as well. And don't forget to check out our newest edition, the Big 6 in 60, the biggest 6 stories of the day every day, which you'd also find on those Amazon Fire TV channels apps as well. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Yeah, we're doing television now. Incredible. Incredible. One of these days, I'm going to do an episode and I'm just going to wax philosophic on like how much Locked On has changed, grown, expanded, how much Locked On Saints has changed, grown, and expanded. We're not going to do that right now. That's not what you're here for. What you're here for right now is football talk. So let's get to some football talk. So look, I'm going to use a couple of betting odds here. I'm not doing this for a branded segment or anything like that. I'm just going to be transparent with you. I'm using it because I do think that it is a good additional set of metrics just to kind of look at maybe what some other folks outside of those that might be more narrative driven, right? I'm in town, I cover the team, so I'm close to them. Some folks don't like the way that the Saints handle their salary cap, so therefore can't predict the Saints to do anything good just based on brand. Betting odds don't typically have those types of skews, right? They're trying to kind of walk the line as neatly as possible in order to make betting more fun and, of course, help make themselves money, help make other people money too. So that's one of the reasons why I'm using this. So I'm going to go through the odds pretty quickly, and then we're going to break down sort of the context around all of it. So passing yards right now, FanDuel has the over-under, so either more or less than 3,325 and a half passing yards. So will he have 3,325 or will he have 3,326 or more is effectively the question that you're asking. Passing touchdowns, the over-under is set at 21 and a half passing touchdowns. So what I wanted to do is look back at both of those numbers and figure out when the last time Derek Carr came in at worse than those numbers were. And here's what we were able to find. The last time and the only time that Derek Carr threw for less than 3,325 yards was his rookie season in 2014. So the other question that you're asking yourself there is, will Derek Carr in 2024 with this new offense, and obviously you got to factor in injury and all these other things, but if he plays a full season, will Derek Carr in 2024 in this new offense have a worse season than what he had in 2014, his rookie year? That's effectively the question that you're asking yourself. So again, they're not projecting Derek Carr to have the greatest season that he's ever had, but they're definitely not projecting him to have the worst either. The last time that he threw less than 21 and a half or 21 or fewer passing touchdowns, he's done that 3 times. 2014, his rookie season, then he did it in 2018 and 2019. So look, last year, in an offense that struggled to get off the ground, in an offense that struggled to score in the red zone for the first half of the season, in an offense that didn't really figure out who they were until after the 12th game of the year, Derek Carr still threw for more than both of those numbers. So the odds are that he's going to be better in 2024 than he was in 2023. And the odds are that he's going to be better than what these lines are currently kind of projecting him to do. why would Derek Carr be worse in 2024 than he would be in 2023? Well, there are a couple of things. Some of it is not necessarily being worse. Some of it is about volume, or some of it is about volume, right? It's a wide zone offense that wants to be predicated on the run game. Could the run game take away from some of the production in the passing game? Sure, that could absolutely happen. But the other part that you have to look at is that the run game actually predicates some of the success that you have on the passing game. You're not going to win games without throwing the football. You throw to score points, then you run to win the game is typically the way that this all works. And so him having a better 2024 than he had in 2023 with what should be a better offense, an offense that we broke down in yesterday's episode, in case you missed it, how motion and play action increases yards per route run production for wide receivers. Well, what that means is that also increases that production for quarterback stats as well, right? The more yards that that wide receivers are picking up, then technically the more yards that quarterbacks are passing for. They're both of the same. So by introducing more play action, by being clearer about being able to diagnose what the defense is doing pre-snap, by utilizing play action where you're going to be able to lure some of these defenses in. And of course, Derek Carr was outstanding last year with utilizing play action. He was really, really good in those situations. And so with all of that considered, knowing, of course, that he's going to have more of those opportunities here in 2024, I think that makes a ton of sense. If you want to look at where Derek Carr was with play action last year, big shout out to Michael Alexander, who wrote it in a YouTube comment in yesterday's episode. 64 out of 87, so completed over 73% of his passes, 813 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, a 116.7 passer rating. I mean, really good stuff. So more of that should lead this offense to being more productive and therefore lead Derek Carr to being more productive, meaning that he comes in at greater totals on the offensive side than what he had in 2023 here in 2024. That's just kind of logic in a way, right? I also think that there is something to maybe people overestimating how much the run game will cut into the passing production. I think that predicating your offense on the run game is about building your offensive passing game through your run game. You're going to have to throw the ball. They are going to want to throw the ball. They have excellent weapons when it comes to throwing the football. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Juwan Johnson, Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara, Kendre Miller, more A.T. Perry, more and more and more. Cedric Wilson, more and more and more and more. They've got good weapons when it comes to all of this as well. We're going to go into that in tomorrow's episode by taking a look at some of the best case scenarios for some of those young weapons. But as each of those weapons furthers in terms of their ability to produce, so too does Derek Carr as the one that's putting the ball in their hands in the passing game. So if Alvin Kamara is being utilized more in space, in screen games, in swing passes, in wheel routes, getting more option routes, things like that, his game expands. So does Derek Carr's. If Kendre Miller starts getting involved in the passing game in that area, same thing. If Rashid Shaheed proves to be more of a yards after catch threat here in 2024 than he had the opportunity to be in 2023, boom, more production for Derek Carr as well. So I think that's the thing that I'm trying to highlight here, or not I think, but that's really the thing that I'm trying to highlight here is it's not necessarily that the run game is going to take away from all this stuff. It builds and builds and builds and lays the foundation for more and more and more and more. Quick play action to Alvin Kamara, quick slant hit to Chris Olave, who's hitting stride for maybe the first time since he's been in New Orleans, and then ends up being able to pick up more yards after catch. Same thing for Rashid Shaheed. All of that is built off of that one play action fake that pulls the linebackers out of the box, opens up that space, hit Rashid Shaheed in stride, let him go and pick up extra yards, more passing yards for Derek Carr. You get what I'm getting at there. So yeah, so FanDuel's got some pretty nice odds to look at when it comes to all that. But I think the bottom line is even they, without any bias one way or another, are looking at Derek Carr having a fine season when I think he can have a better season. Coming up next, let's take a look at why some experts are predicting a down season for Derek Carr and why sometimes some of those purposes or some of those reasons have nothing to do with Derek Carr himself. And that's just an unfortunate truth. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. We are wrapping up today's show, taking a look at Derek Carr and why Maybe some analysts believe he's going to have a down season, and why some of that criticism doesn't really even have anything to do with Derek Carr himself. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here. Don't forget, we are your team every day. So coming up in tomorrow's episode, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at Derek Carr's season, what the successful season could look like for him in 2024. Tomorrow, I want to go into what the best case scenarios for some of Derek Carr's young weapons. So we're going to leave some of the older players, older offensive, more proven players out of the conversation for this one. But I want to look at guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and A.T. Perry, Kendre Miller, Dallin Holker. Like, what are some of the best case scenarios for these guys going into the 2024 season? We're going to break that down in tomorrow's show. So take a look at what maybe some experts are going to project as a down season for Derek Carr. I wanted to kind of go into the why and why I think that some of those projections are happening. They're not necessarily projections that I agree with, if I'm being completely honest, but that's not really the point of what we're discussing here. I want to kind of push back on some of the down projections that I think that some experts are trying to give. So one of the big things that I typically see when it comes to Derek Carr is that having a down season is him learning the new offensive system. It's so funny how we here in New Orleans that have watched this team, that know this team intimately, and that cover this team, we see the new offense as a good thing. We look at it and we go, oh yeah, that's definitely something that the New Orleans Saints needed desperately, was sort of this new change on offense. Well, a lot of folks from outside of the fan base, outside of those that know the team the best, look at it as a potential hazard. What typically happens when offenses are changing over is that fantasy communities can get pretty excited. Fans tend to get pretty excited, but then analysts and experts walk into the unknown, I don't know what to expect area, which isn't wrong. All right. Look, that's completely possible and completely okay to walk in and say, I don't know what's going to happen. But it's so interesting that I don't know also somehow immediately equates to, well, that's going to stink. And that tends to be the sort of barometer that you pick up from folks looking at Derek Carr's season. He's going into a new offense. He's going into what is his 7th offensive coordinator change in his career as well. I want to break that down for you. He started off in 2014 with Greg Olsen, his rookie season, as his offensive coordinator, offensive play caller. 2015, 2016 was the first change. All right. So I'm just counting the number of changes. So going from Greg Olsen to Bill Musgrave, then going from Bill Musgrove, then going from Musgrove to Downing was his second change. Then he went from Downing to back to Greg Olsen, but it was really John Gruden. So that's a change still in 2018 through 2021. Then all of a sudden, John Gruden gets let go because of some despicable emails and all this other stuff, name calling, misogynistic, sexist, racist language, all this other stuff. And then Rich Bisaccia takes over, which means that play calling then goes back to Greg Olsen. Now that means that he gets Greg Olsen for a second time, but it's still the 4th change between 2014 to 2021. Then going into 2022, he had Josh McDaniels. Going into 2023, he had Pete Carmichael. Now going into 2024, he's got Klint Kubiak. So he's had 7 of these changes, 7 total offensive coordinators, 8 total different stints of offensive coordinator with Greg Olsen counted twice. That's tough to navigate. Now, is that the root of all problems? No, right? Like we know better than that. We know the holes that have been in Derek Carr's game throughout his career, red zone, things like that. We saw some of those things improve though last year. So we'll see where things go here in 2024, but I understand a little bit of the pump the brakes-ness that comes with the idea that, hey, of the we don't know mentality that comes with, 8.5 being the, win total for the New Orleans Saints and things like that are typically indicative, numbers that are typically indicative of, we don't really know what to do with this team. But what I don't agree with is that those things somehow equate to, well, this is going to go poorly and Derek Carr is going to have a bad season. You look at PFF, they project a good season. You look at NFL, they project a bad season or a mediocre season. You look at CBS, they're kind of walking the line. You look here at Locked On Saints, we think it's going to be a better season than 2023 because it's just kind of what logically makes sense. But I do understand a little bit of the wishy-washiness that can come with new offense, 7th OC change. That part I get, but I don't know how you take that and immediately go downhill. I think that in some cases, when you take that and you immediately go downhill, it's no longer about Derek Carr. It's about brand consistency, right? The analysts that sometimes pick for Derek Carr to have a terrible season in 2024 or a bad season or a mediocre season in 2024 are the same analysts that don't agree with the New Orleans Saints salary cap approach, for instance. And so what you'll notice is that by not agreeing with the way that the Saints are building out their team, refusing to not be competitive, all these other things, that all they can do is project bad because they don't project that the strategy by which the team is trying to remain competitive is as being a good one. So therefore, you can't say, well, the Saints aren't going to work because they did X, Y, and Z, and they're not rebuilding the way that I think they should be rebuilding, but I think they're going to have a good season in 2024. That would be oxymoronical. So it's a brand consistency thing. The other thing, too, is that, look, the Saints do take an uncharacteristic approach, okay? That's just what it's always been. And now that they're not winning games at the rate at which they were once winning games, 2006 through 2020, 2021, then all of a sudden that uncharacteristic approach is going to be under a finer tooth comb. It's going to be under a bigger microscope, however it is that you want to put it. You're going to need a bigger boat for the bigger criticism. Like, it's going to be there. And so I think that that's where a lot of this comes from too, is that it's not actually even about Derek Carr. It's just kind of about how people feel about the New Orleans Saints approach, and therefore it colors how they look at all the rest of the things that touch the New Orleans Saints or that wear New Orleans Saints uniforms, so on and so forth. And the fact that the Saints went out there with no salary cap money and signed a free agent quarterback to a $140 million deal or whatever, that drives people even more crazy because they still think that Taysom Hill's getting paid $40 million a year, which has never been true. So I think that there's also those realities as well of just sort of the core misunderstanding of how it is that the New Orleans Saints are conducting business and how the New Orleans Saints conduct themselves. Now, I'm not saying that that's always the case, but I'm saying that's definitely the case in certain instances, which are pretty easy to sniff out. So I think that oftentimes when it comes to people being down on Derek Carr, it's because of what is sensible, which is basing their projections on what they've seen before to be negative, which is understandable. If what you've seen before you deem negative, then you're going to expect negative moving forward. Or you're not so sure just based upon all the things that are changing. That makes perfect sense. Or you're in a situation to where, you're not doing an evidence-based down or an evidence-based negativity. You're doing instead a negativity that's based upon a larger persuasion or a larger set of influence based upon what you believe the Saints should or shouldn't be doing. So a couple of things that I've seen from a couple of folks that have chimed in here that have been taken in the show. They're saying that a successful season for Derek Carr would be 4,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, and not less than 10 interceptions. Completely agree. That would be a successful season. That shouldn't be the threshold for a successful season, but that would definitely be a successful season. No doubt about that. And I think that many other folks have kind of leaned in on the idea of like more than 4,000 yards, more than 25 to 30 touchdowns, and then, interceptions. Like I said, I can give or take interceptions depending upon what the core of those interceptions are. Are those tip passes that end up getting intercepted elsewhere? Or are they bad passes, things like that? I think we have to look at that type of context too. But I think less than 12 interceptions definitely get you there. All right, so that's just a quick look at what I think a successful season would be for 2024 for Derek Carr, what the betting odds are showing, which tend to lack a little bit of bias, and then just kind of going on the other side of what might be my own bias in terms of the experts that are looking at a potential down season for Derek Carr, and how some of that doesn't really have anything to do with Derek Carr in certain situations. So got to be careful to sniff all those things out. Coming up tomorrow, we're taking a look at best case scenarios for all of Derek Carr's young weapons: Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry. We'll also take a look at Kendre Miller, Dallin Holker, and more. So we're going to break all of that down in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, don't forget to go and check out Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans, Matt Moscona over at Locked On LSU. Locked On Louisiana's on fire. Make sure you go and check out all the work from all the good friends here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.